There is a special group of citizens fighting the war on terror. Filled with a deep loyalty to the ideals of democracy, they are willing to lay down their lives in the service of the nation. Yet they have no vote in Congress and no role in choosing their commander-in-chief. These are men and women from Puerto Rico, an island territory of the United States, where 4 million people have lived for too long in political limbo. Their time has come.
The United States is the world's oldest democracy, and we as a nation are very proud of the fact that we are the light of the world in that sense in regards to trying to promote democratic human rights, civil rights across the world. How can then we have 4 million of our own citizens in a disenfranchised, institutionally marginalized position?
Residents of Puerto Rico may not have a vote on Capitol Hill, but they certainly have a voice there. The Citizens Educational Foundation is a nonpartisan organization working toward a permanent political status for the people of Puerto Rico. Their goal is to impel Congress, which holds ultimate authority over the island, to help resolve a self-determination dilemma more than a century in the making. Puerto Rico is an island of great beauty and rich cultural traditions, about 1,000 miles southeast of Miami, Florida. A Spanish colony since 1493, Puerto Rico was ceded to the United States in 1898, following the Spanish-American War. Questions about Puerto Rico's relationship to the United States arose almost immediately.
The word colony has never been acceptable in the United States because the United States is governed by a Republican Constitution.
Instead, Puerto Rico was designated a territory of the United States.
What that means is that Puerto Rico's relationship to the United States is governed by the territory clause of the Constitution.
The U.S. Constitution states that the Congress shall have power to dispose of and make all needful rules and regulations, respecting the territory or other property belonging to the United States. Territorial status has traditionally been a temporary one, meant to usher a U.S. possession to either statehood or independence.
But in Puerto Rico's case, the clause has taken on a somewhat permanent interpretation. That is, there has been no decision as to whether Puerto Rico is going to become a state, whether it'll become independence, or what's going to happen. So Puerto Rico is currently under the territorial clause, and no further decision has been made as to what's going to happen.
Some may ask, what's wrong with that? In many ways, the years since 1898 have been extremely fruitful for Puerto Rico. The island that was once called the poorhouse of the Caribbean now boasts the highest standard of living in the region and an education system that's training the leaders of tomorrow. Residents of Puerto Rico were granted U.S. citizenship by Congress in 1917, and people on the island enjoy a large degree of local self-governance. But they are denied a role in national politics. They are eligible to be drafted, and indeed they've served honorably in every war and conflict of the past century. Yet they are not eligible to vote in presidential elections, and their only representative in Congress is a single, non-voting delegate.
This cuts against all international human rights law that we know of. You know, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the UN Declaration of Human Rights. You know, all of these human rights instruments tell us that the right to vote is fundamental, and that people who are citizens of a nation, as people in Puerto Rico are, have to have a right to vote there.
This isn't a Puerto Rican issue. This is a civil rights issue. We have 4 million U.S. citizens that do not have full rights, yet they're U.S. citizens, and that's not right. It should be changed.
Puerto Rico's territorial status, with its inherent instability, also has economic implications. Capital is accumulated without being reinvested in the island. Unemployment remains too high, and educated, highly skilled workers are forced to seek opportunities elsewhere. And then there are the residents of Puerto Rico themselves, who have been engaged for decades in an inconclusive debate about political status.
There have been 3 plebiscites on the question of status in Puerto Rico, and the one clear message that they've all sent is that there is almost universal discontent with the status quo.
In the most recent vote on status, in 1998, less than 0.1% of participants selected Puerto Rico's current territorial status as their preferred option. To add to the confusion, a majority of voters chose none of the above. Jose Aponte of the Citizens Educational Foundation sees the need for congressional action to initiate a clear and binding process by which the U.S. citizens of Puerto Rico will select a permanent political status.
We are an organization that is not advocating any one particular status option per se, but essentially getting Congress to tell the people of Puerto Rico what are the options that they have available. It is time for us as a people to stop fighting among ourselves and going through these vicious cycles as to what the best option is until we know what are the options we can aspire to, and then we can make an informed decision.
Should Congress decide to initiate a self-determination process in Puerto Rico, there are clear guidelines for proceeding.
Under both constitutional law and international law, there are 3 viable options for Puerto Rico to pursue. The first one is integration into the United States on an equal basis as all the other states, so that would be statehood. The second is full independence and sovereignty, and Puerto Rico would become formally equal with all other sovereign nation states. And the third option for Puerto Rico would be the free association option. That option would involve separate sovereignty, but a treaty with the United States in which Puerto Rico and the United States could agree to share power in a variety of ways. Any one of those 3 options would ensure full political equality for Puerto Rico and for its people.
The movement for Puerto Rico to attain this equality has been joined by civil rights organizations, veterans groups, and local legislatures across the country.
We feel very strongly that the United States of America, our government, should not have a colony anywhere. We would like to see that issue brought to the table and Puerto Rico decide that issue.
I don't think it's correct to have 4 million U.S. citizens without a right to vote, without a right to elect the president that makes decisions that affect the lives of the veterans. I mean, this is no state would put up with that, and I think it's about time that Congress acted to mandate a vote in Puerto Rico to clarify what the options are and let the people of Puerto Rico decide.
This is a very, very important issue to Puerto Ricans, but it's also important to those who are not Puerto Ricans, who view this as a self-determination question, who view it as a civil rights issue. This is an era where we should not allow, be it in California or in Puerto Rico, the disenfranchisement of any population.
So far, legislators in California, as well as in Texas, Florida, and Wisconsin, have adopted resolutions supporting Puerto Rico's self-determination. And a growing network of grassroots supporters utilize the website of the Citizens Educational Foundation, cefus.net, to learn more about how they can help resolve Puerto Rico's status dilemma.
America from the beginning has tried to stand for the principle of consent of the governed, a phrase that comes from Jefferson in the Declaration of Independence. You know, if you're part of the governed, you must be able to give your consent as well as your dissent, but you must be able to participate meaningfully in the processes of political consent.
We're not asking to decide whether Puerto Rico should be a state of the union or an independent nation. Again, that's a decision that the people of Puerto Rico will and should make for themselves, but what we're simply asking is to enable a process so that they can make that decision.
When that time comes, the territorial status of Puerto Rico will come to an end. The sacrifices of thousands of veterans will be justified. The island's enormous economic potential will be unleashed, and the 4 million people living in Puerto Rico will be empowered to determine their own political destiny.